case that the money is there, it is being spent in the federal government, and then we can go into the whole thing about how those wars actually make us less safe and so on and so forth, but that it's a question of priorities and the money is there, and we have to have that information at our fingertips. Lindsay Kashgarian of the Institute for Policy Studies, Paul Shannon of the American Friends Service Committee, and Kea Vanderziel of Greater Boston Physicians for Social Responsibility are going to take us through this. Lindsay, hey, you guys have to come up here because of the mic. I guess I'll sit over there.
Lindsay.
That's my name. It's actually better over here because the light's not shining in your eyes. So,
Turn on the, yeah.
So thanks everybody for hanging out here all day on a Friday and into your Friday night. I am with the Institute for Policy Studies and I run the National Priorities Project, our graph right there. I just want to say I knew I was at MIT today because I came in the building and I just got out of the car for a 2-hour drive and I was looking for a bathroom and I found a men's room and then I kept walking and looking and I found another men's room. So, but when this becomes a public college, I know they're all going to go to gender neutral, so the problem will be solved. All day long, people have been telling you about what we should spend our money on that we're not currently spending it on.
Lights up.
And I get to tell you where we can get the money from. So it's not just that we need all of this money, but we actually have it and we can just take it from where it is now and put it where it needs to be. I'm mostly going to talk about Pentagon spending because that's what I was asked to talk about, but as an editor of the moral budget, I can also tell you that in addition to $350 billion in Pentagon cuts, we also identified over $880 billion in fair taxes that we could raise. And since the time that the moral budget came out, there was a study that came out that said that we're spending $650 billion a year on subsidies for fossil fuels. So there's a lot of money that we can put toward all of these things that everyone has been talking about and explaining so well. But I'm here to talk about the Pentagon budget. This is 2017, things have gotten worse since then. Now in 2019, the military budget, that number is $716 billion. And next year, thanks to the bipartisan agreement in Congress, we are headed to 738, and the year after that to 750. So we're going up and up on a trend. There was a national security report that was required by Congress that came out last year that said that where we need to be is a full trillion, a cool trillion on just the military. People in this room might know that if you take the military budget and add spending on veterans and spending on border patrol and spending on deportations and raids and spending on a whole lot of other things like that, you can already get up to over $1 trillion, but they want to take it much higher. So what we did with the moral budget was we looked at what's fair game to cut. Where is the spending going that is not making us safer, that in some cases is making the world more dangerous, and where that money would be better spent elsewhere. There are a few major things that we identified. First on the list, not just in terms of dollars, but in terms of sort of necessity, is stop spending on war. We have spent, it's about $5 trillion now, and we're on the hook for even more going forward if we take care of our veterans as we should. And there's a study that came out this summer that said that the cost of moving our electrical grid to a clean energy grid would be about $4.2 trillion. So if we had spent that money over the last 20 years, instead of spending it on wars, if we had spent it instead on an electrical grid, we would have a clean electrical grid by now. And that's the kind of choice that we need to not make for the 20 years going forward. So war savings is one of our top priorities, and it's one of the biggest sources of savings in the moral budget. There are also a lot of ways that this will make us safer. I think everyone probably knows that the war in Iraq hasn't worked out so well. There was an Army study that came out that said that the only winner of the war in Iraq was Iran. And now look where we are with Iran. So this is not working out well. And it's time to end those. And I think we're starting to hear more of that. They're in the two military spending bills that are working their way through Congress right now. Both of them on the House side have provisions that would revoke authority for, depending on which bill it is and which they cover Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan, and a preemptive, no, you can't just go to war with Iran. So those things are starting to move in the right direction. We'll know within the next month or so probably whether any of that makes it into the final deals that they make with the Senate. Another big major cut that we identify in the moral budget is cutting foreign military bases. We hear a lot more about domestic bases, but foreign military bases are a huge part of the Pentagon budget, and we have over 800 of them, of military installations around the world. That's more than 90% of the world's foreign military installations. There's no reason for us to have all of those, other than our need for global dominance, which is not helping us at all. The other cuts that we identify are cuts to weapons systems. More than half of the Pentagon budget goes to contractors, and so we identify a bunch of weapons systems that we could cut, including a total ban on nuclear weapons. And we also did some work recently. There's a couple of proposed bills in Massachusetts, in the state right now, that would do various things to sort of say that Massachusetts wants the money back from our nuclear weapons. We're spending $21 billion right now. Nationally, about $700 million of that comes from Massachusetts taxpayers. If that came back to Massachusetts, it could fund the $500 million for the Cherish Act that we heard about a little while ago for higher education. It could fund the state's entire shortage of special ed teachers. It could fund 150,000 houses to go to wind power, and it could fund $2.5 million, that is what a study said we need for the regional transportation authorities, all of that, just by cutting nuclear weapons. So there's tremendous power in being able to cut these, and thanks to the Poor People's Campaign, and I know there are folks here from the Poor People's Campaign, and another effort that we're also involved with called People Over Pentagon, which you should Google if you want, which is an effort that is trying to make this issue part of the presidential campaign. And just this afternoon I was actually on the phone with the coalition to talk to Kamala Harris's campaign staff about the need to cut the military budget to pay for other priorities. So those two efforts I think are tremendously hopeful, along with a lot of the state efforts that are happening here in Massachusetts, like the Massachusetts Moral Budget effort.
Unless you can't hear me,
The camera is on that. We need to
Oh,
see
okay.
it.
Okay, well, hello everyone. Nice to see you all. We've been talking about things this afternoon that cost a lot of money. And I find it interesting that in the different presentations that clearly some of us are really focused on raising that money in our cities and towns. Most of us seem to be focused on raising that money through the state, taxes of various sorts, fees. And others of us, of course, are focused on the national level. I'm focused on the national level because really that's where the money is. Do not forget that of this Massachusetts budget that we're talking about and needing to increase on education and all these things, 24% of that budget comes from the federal Congress. Another $4 billion comes to 50 other state agencies and directly into the budgets of cities and towns. Without that money, a lot of what we have goes down the tubes. With more of that money, we can do some of the things, actually all the things, that has been talked about today. As Marilyn mentioned, free public college, you Fox News, oh, trillions of dollars. We know how to do free college. We had it. We got rid of it. And that's because we became poorer over the last 40 years, right? The country just became very poor. There's just no money out there. So we can't have free public college anymore. Massachusetts taxpayers, last year, just Massachusetts taxpayers sent directly to the Pentagon $23.1 billion from Massachusetts to the Pentagon. Massachusetts taxpayers, of all that billions we sent last year to the federal government, which is more, of course, than the $23 billion, sent a total of $230 million for public transportation. $23.1 billion versus $230 million from Massachusetts. If we just took a little sliver of that money that we sent to the Pentagon, we could easily solve our mass transit problem without any problem at all. All it takes is $2 billion a year. We could still send over the next 5 years $110 billion to the Pentagon and have a first-class mass transit system. The Green New Deal, very expensive, very expensive. $9.3 trillion over 30 years. Very expensive. $6.3 trillion of that is supposed to come from private sources. We won't go into all that. But to get it going, you need $3 trillion of federal money. Massachusetts doesn't have $3 trillion to put into that. $3 trillion is $100 billion a year over 30 years. Just since 2018, our Pentagon budget has gone up $150 billion. $100 billion on a federal level is chump change. In terms of federal money and Pentagon money that Lindsay is talking about, I think a very good place to start, because our problem is convincing a lot of people that this is what we got to do, and then doing the things necessary to force our government to do those things. I think a good way to start is by saying, at least let's start with taking the money that is being used for war crimes. Maybe there could be a more moral use of that money than slaughtering people or destroying entire countries like Iraq. U.S. said to abet Yemen war crimes. By arming and backing the Saudi-led coalition fighting in Yemen, the United States, Britain, and France may be complicit in potential war crimes, the United Nations said in a scathing report. You've heard all this stuff on Yemen. We and the Saudis are running this war. Maybe that money could be better used. Maybe a lot of people would agree with us on that. Maybe we could start with things like that and start to get some of that money. If we go to war with Iran, do you realize how many lives are going to be lost? Do you realize what it's going to do to this country? Never mind Iran and the rest of the Middle East. Maybe there could be a better use for that money. Let me just close with this. Last year, 2 years ago, I guess it was now, let's go with this, $646 billion for the Pentagon budget for 1 year, right? Next year is going to be a lot more, but let's stay with that. Do you know what Russia, our big bad bear out there that's out to get us, you know what their military budget is right now? $62 billion. Less, 10 times less. If you take the entire military budget of the United States and its allies and compare it to the military budgets of all the countries on earth that we hate. Okay, let's start with China, Russia, Iran, of course, Venezuela, Cuba. I mean, these monstrous military powers. I mean, we and our allies spend 4 times more than all of them combined. So, let's figure out how to get our act together, go to where the money is. And we could do a lot of good things with it. Thank you.